The knock came at dusk, 3 slow raps against pine that had known only wind for 6 years. Silas Ward set down the tin cup, and the coffee inside it stopped trembling before his hand did. He stared at the door as if the wood itself had betrayed him. Nobody knocked out here. The nearest neighbor was 11 miles east, and he was a drunk who never traveled after sundown. The tax man came every March and left every March. And it was August now, dry and mean, with the wheat gone brown at the edges and the sky above the Colorado plateau the color of a healing bruise. 3 raps. Then silence. Silas rose from the table. His knees cracked. 43 years old, and his body kept the ledger of every one of them. He crossed the cabin's single room without hurry, without sound, boots finding the boards that didn't creak. Old habit. Habits like that never left a man, no matter how much dirt he threw over them. The cold dragoon lay wrapped in oilcloth beneath the loose board under the wash basin. He did not go to it. He had promised Mary, before the fever took her, that the gun would stay buried. He'd kept that promise for 6 years. He meant to keep it for 60 more. He opened the door. The girl on his porch could not have been more than 14. Blood was drying on her upper lip. Her left sleeve was torn from shoulder to elbow, and there was a bruise the color of a plum blooming along her jaw. She held a folded piece of paper in both hands like it might catch fire if she let go. "Are you Silas Ward?" she said. Her voice shook, but her eyes did not. He didn't answer. He looked past her, over her head, at the empty yard, the empty road, the empty long stretch of scrub and yucca out to where the mesas began. Nothing. No horse. No dust cloud. No sign of how a child had crossed 20 miles of nothing to arrive at his door bleeding. "How did you get here?" he said. "Walked from the creek. Somebody dropped me there." Her chin lifted. "Are you him or not?" "Depends who's asking." She held out the paper. The fold was crisp. The paper was fine, the kind rich men used, not the yellowed pulp of a homesteader. Silas didn't take it. He looked at it the way a man looks at a snake curled on his pillow. "My father said to give this only to Silas Ward. He said you'd know his name when you read it. He said if you didn't come, we'd all be dead by Sunday." Silas felt something move inside his chest that he thought he'd killed. It rolled over like a dog waking from a long sleep. "Girl," he said quietly, "what's your name?" "Ellen. Ellen Coyne." The name hit him like a fist he had watched coming for 6 years and still not moved to block. Bram Coyne. Bram Coyne, whose brother he had shot dead in a bank in Dodge City in the fall of '76. Bram Coyne, who had sworn on that same brother's blood that he would find Silas Ward if it took him the rest of his life. Bram Coyne, who had a daughter, apparently. A daughter with courage enough to walk 20 miles alone with blood drying on her lip. Silas took the paper. His fingers, when they closed on it, were steadier than they had any right to be. He unfolded it under the last of the daylight. "Ward, they came for me first because they think I know where you are. I did not tell them. I will not tell them. But Cotter Reeves rides with 6 men, and he is not a man who takes no for an answer. He has my wife. He wants you. If you come, maybe some of us live. If you do not, none of us do. I am sorry for what I said to you in Kansas. I was wrong. B. Coyne." Silas read it twice. Then he read it a third time, slower, because the third time was the one where a man decided. He looked at the girl. She was watching him the way a hawk watches a field, patient, without hope, without fear, because there was no room left for either. "Where did they take your mother?" "The old Holbrook place. On the ridge. 6 of them, and one who don't talk. That one is the worst." Silas nodded once. He stepped back from the door and let her come in. The cabin smelled of coffee and lamp oil and, faintly, of the lavender Mary had planted along the west wall 6 summers ago. It still bloomed every year, though nobody tended it. Silas thought about that lavender as he crossed to the wash basin and lifted the loose board. The oilcloth, the weight of it, the dragoon inside, cold as a river stone. He had promised Mary. He had promised the ground she was buried in. He had promised the piece of himself he had tried to leave with her. He unwrapped the gun. Behind him, Ellen Coyne sat down in Mary's chair because it was the closest one, and she did not know it was Mary's chair, and there was no reason she should. She watched him load the cylinder. She counted the rounds as he thumbed them home. 6. She did not flinch at the sound. "There's more than 6 of them, mister." "I know." He closed the cylinder. It clicked with a sound he had not heard in 6 years and had never once forgotten. "I only need one for each." She stared at him. In the low lamplight, Her bruise looked black. "My father said you were the fastest gun west of the Missouri. He said that's why he hated you." Silas slid the dragoon into his belt. He picked up his hat from the peg by the door, the plain gray one, not the black one Mary had made him burn. "Your father was wrong on both counts," he said. "I wasn't the fastest. And he didn't hate me." He opened the door. The wind coming off the plateau smelled of dust, and something else, something faint and metallic that might have been coming rain or might have been coming blood. 6 years of peace. 6 years of wheat and lavender and quiet mornings. 3 slow raps had ended all of it. The barn was colder than the cabin, and it smelled of hay gone dry and leather gone stiff. Silas lit the lantern on the beam and hung it where it wouldn't swing. The mare, Juno, lifted her head from the trough and looked at him with the slow, patient distrust of an animal that had not been ridden hard in a long time. "Not tonight, old girl," he said. "Tonight, I need the other one." The other one was a bay gelding named Kettle, ill-tempered and 15 hands of trouble, kept because Mary had loved him, and Silas could not bring himself to sell what Mary had loved. He had not been saddled in 11 months. He laid his ears back when Silas came near. "I know," Silas said. "I know." He saddled the horse anyway. His hands remembered. His hands remembered too much. Ellen stood in the barn doorway with a blanket around her shoulders that had been Mary's. Silas had not offered it. She had simply taken it off the hook by the stove because she was cold, and it had been the nearest thing, and Silas had not stopped her because stopping her would have required saying words he did not have. "You gonna ride out tonight?" she said. "No." "Why not?" "Because I ride out tonight. I get to that ridge at midnight, and I get killed at midnight." He tightened the cinch. Kettle bit at his shoulder and missed. "I ride out at 3. I get there at dawn." "Dawn is different." "Different how?" "Men who took your mother," he said. "They'll be tired at dawn. They'll have watched all night for someone who wasn't coming. Their eyes will be full of sand. Their trigger fingers will be slow." She thought about that. She was 14, and she thought about that the way a jurist thinks about evidence. "You've done this before." "A long time ago." "How many men have you killed, mister?" He stopped with his hand on the girth. He looked at her over Kettle's back. Her face in the lantern light was pale and old, the way children's faces got old when the world took the childhood out of them too fast. "More than I can count on both hands," he said. "Fewer than I dream about." She nodded like that was an answer she understood. Then she said, "My father shot a man in Amarillo 2 years ago." He cried after. "I heard him." Silas said nothing. There was nothing to say. Ellen Coyne, who had once put a rifle barrel against Silas Ward's forehead in a saloon in Kansas and cocked the hammer and then, at the last second, wept and lowered the gun and walked out into the snow. Ellen Coyne had a daughter who had heard him cry over a killing. It was almost enough to make a man believe in something. Silas turned back to the horse. He worked in silence for a while. Then he said, "How did you cross that country alone?" "I ran," she said. "Then I walked. Then I crawled some. There was a woman with a wagon on the trail past the creek. She wouldn't take me all the way. She was scared. She said men had passed her going west that morning, and she'd seen their eyes. She was right to be scared. She gave me water and pointed. She said everyone knew where the quiet man lived. She said everyone knew, but nobody said." Silas paused again. He had wondered, over the years, how well he had disappeared. The answer, apparently, was not as well as he'd thought. The country had watched him settle. The country had let him have his 6 years. But the country had never once forgotten his name. He led Kettle out of the stall and tied him to the post. Then he sat down on the milking stool and looked at his hands. They were farmer's hands now, sun-cracked and split at the knuckles, the calluses in the wrong places for a gun. He would have to remake them. In a few hours. On a ridge. With a girl's mother's life balanced on the change. "Mr. Ward." "Silas. Silas." She said it carefully, as if trying it out. "Are you going to save her?" He looked up. He had learned, over a long and blood-marked life, never to promise a thing you could not deliver. He had learned it from a man who had promised his mother he would come back from the war and had not. He had learned it from a woman who had promised him she would beat the fever and had not. He had learned it in every direction a promise could break. "I'm going to try," he said. "I'm going to try harder than I've tried at anything in 6 years. But I won't lie to you, Ellen. I don't know if trying will be enough." She nodded. Her chin did not tremble. She was, he thought, the bravest child he had ever met, and he wondered what her mother must be like to have made her, and he wondered if her mother was still alive to know. You'll stay here, he said. In the cabin. There's food in the cupboard and water in the crock. If I'm not back by sundown tomorrow, I'm not staying. He looked at her. I'm not staying, Silas Ward. She's my mother. I walked 20 miles. I'm not sitting in your cabin looking at your dead wife's chair. He did not ask how she'd known it was Mary's chair. Children knew things. Children who had grown up around grief could smell it the way dogs smelled fear. You'll slow me down. I'll ride behind you. I won't make a sound. I'll get off when you say, and I'll hide where you say. But I'm going. Her voice cracked, and then steadied, and it was the steadying that broke something in him. I brought you the letter. I earned the ride. He looked at her for a long time. Outside, the wind rose. It carried a sound with it that had not been there 10 minutes ago, a sound very faint and very far, but unmistakable to a man who had spent half his life listening for it. Hoofbeats. More than one horse. Coming from the west. Coming here. Silas doused the lantern with his palm, and the barn went black. Down, he said. Behind the barrel. Now. Ellen dropped without a sound. 6 years of not being hunted, and he'd still forgotten nothing. She'd already known to move before he finished the word. That was the kind of child she was. That was the kind of father Bram Coyne must have been, when he wasn't drinking and wasn't grieving and wasn't hunting the man who'd killed his brother. Silas eased to the barn door and looked through the crack. 3 riders. Moving slow, spread wide. The way men move when they mean not to be counted at first glance. The one in the middle carried no rifle across his saddle. His hands were empty, resting on the horn, and that made him the most dangerous of the 3. A man who did not need his hands ready was a man who had already decided how the next minute would go. Silas felt the weight of the dragoon at his belt. He felt, more, the weight of 6 years pressing up against the moment like a hand against a door. He was not ready. He knew that. His draw would be slow. His aim would be honest but hesitant. He had trained his body to plant seeds, not pull triggers, and the body remembered what you fed it. But he had one thing they didn't. He had the dark, and he had a barn he'd built himself, board by board, and he knew where every knot in every plank sat. The riders stopped at the edge of the yard. The middle one, the one with the empty hands, spoke without raising his voice, and his voice carried anyway, the way a rattlesnake's carries. Silas Ward, we know you're home. Your lamp was lit 10 minutes ago, and it ain't lit now. That's a tell, friend. Come out slow, and we'll talk about the Coyne woman. Cotter Reeves. It had to be. The letter had named him, and the voice fit the name, dry as a creek bed, patient as death. Silas said nothing. We passed a girl on the road, Reeves went on. 14 or thereabouts. Bloodied lip. Didn't stop her, figured she'd lead us somewhere useful. Was I right, Ward? She lead us somewhere useful. Behind him, in the dark, Silas heard Ellen's breath catch and hold. He put a hand flat on the wall beside her. Steady. It was all the comfort he could give. Reeves waited. When Silas didn't answer, he sighed, actually sighed, like a schoolteacher disappointed in a slow pupil, and lifted one hand. The rider on the left swung down from his saddle and started walking toward the barn. Silas drew. 6 years, and the gun came up like it had never left his hand. Not fast, not the way it once had been, but true. He put the front sight on the walking man's chest through the crack in the barn door, and he waited until the man was 10 feet away, and then he squeezed. The dragoon roared. The barn shook. The walking man went down without a sound and did not get up. Then everything happened at once. Reeves' horse reared. The third rider fired blind at the barn, and a splinter of pine bit Silas across the cheek. Silas moved, sideways, low, along the wall, the way you moved in a fight where cover was everything, and came up at the second crack in the wood and fired again. The third rider slumped in his saddle. His horse bolted, dragging him, one boot caught in the stirrup, out into the yard and gone. Reeves did not run. Reeves swung down from his horse, calm as a man dismounting at church, and walked to the fallen rider and looked at him without expression. Then he looked up at the barn. 2 shots. 2 hits. You ain't as rusty as I hoped, Ward. Silas said nothing. He was already moving toward the back of the barn, toward the small door that opened onto the corral, toward the piece of cover that was the water trough and the cottonwood stump. His hand found Ellen's shoulder in the dark and squeezed once. She rose without a sound. He pushed her ahead of him. I'm going to make you a deal, Reeves called. He had not moved from the yard. You come out now, alone, and I ride back to that ridge, and I let the Coyne woman go. She rides west. You and me settle it here, tonight. That's a clean deal. That's the best deal you'll ever be offered. Silas paused at the back door. He could hear it in Reeves' voice, the thing that was not a lie exactly, but wasn't quite the truth either. Reeves would let the woman go. Reeves would even mean it, in the moment. But Reeves would kill Silas. And then Reeves would ride back to that ridge because it was on his way, and Reeves would kill the woman anyway, because Reeves was the kind of man who did not leave witnesses, and did not leave loose threads, and did not leave anything alive that had seen his face. It was not a deal. It was a wrapper on a deal. Silas, Ellen whispered. I know. He's lying. I know. He eased the back door open. The corral was empty except for Kettle, tied still to the post, wide-eyed but silent. Mary's horse, who somehow, at the moment it mattered most, was refusing to spook. Silas boosted Ellen up first. Then he swung up behind her. He did not close the back door. He wanted Reeves to hear it swing. Hold the mane, he whispered. Hold tight. Don't scream no matter what. He kicked Kettle into a run. They burst out of the corral and around the barn and past the lavender and out onto the open road going east, not west, not toward the ridge but away from it. And behind him, he heard Reeves shout once. A single sharp word without a name in it. And then the sound of a horse being mounted fast. Silas rode. He rode with a 14-year-old girl in front of him and a dead man's ghost behind him and a woman he had never met balanced on the ridge to the west like a lantern he could not yet see. He rode east because east was wrong. Because east was where nobody would look for a man riding to save a hostage on the western ridge. Because east was the long way around. Over the dry wash and up through the pinyon and down the far side to hit the Hallbrook place from the back, at dawn, when tired men's eyes were full of sand. He rode. And behind them, growing fainter but not gone, one horse followed. They stopped in the pinyon 2 hours before dawn. Silas eased Kettle behind a stand of juniper thick enough to break their silhouette against the paling sky. He lifted Ellen down first. Her legs buckled and he caught her under the arms and set her against the trunk of a tree and crouched in front of her and looked into her face. You did good, he said. You did good. She was shaking now. All of it was catching up. The blood on her lip had cracked and flaked away and left the swelling bare. And in the pale first light, she looked so much like her father at 17 that Silas had to look away for a moment and steady his breath. He unwrapped his neckerchief and wet it with water from the canteen, and, careful as a man handling a bird's egg, cleaned her mouth. She flinched once and then held still. Was it him who hit you, he said. Reeves? The other one. The one who don't talk. He's still at the ridge? I think so. He didn't ride out with the 3 that came for you. Silas nodded slowly. That was worth knowing. That meant the ridge held 3 men plus the silent one, for guns still, minus the 2 he'd taken in the yard, which put the odds at 4-1. Bad odds. Not the worst he'd ever ridden into. Not by half. He sat down beside her against the tree. Kettle grazed a few feet away, ears turning, listening for the follower who had fallen behind an hour ago and not caught up. Reeves, most likely. Reeves alone now. Reeves who would go back for reinforcements or go straight to the ridge or, worst of all, sit somewhere unseen and wait for Silas to come to him. The sky in the east was the color of old pearl. Silas, Ellen said, why did my father hate you? He had known the question was coming. He had been rehearsing the answer for 2 hours in the saddle. Because I killed his brother. She was silent a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was very small, but it did not tremble. Why did you? Because his brother was robbing a bank in Dodge City, and he shot a woman who was praying at the window, and he was about to shoot her daughter, and I was the marshal's deputy, and I put a bullet through his heart before he could pull the trigger a second time. He paused. He kept his eyes on the horizon. Your uncle wasn't a bad man his whole life, Ellen. But he was a bad man that day, and I was the man who stopped him. And your father loved him. She thought about that a long time. My father cried when he told me my uncle died. He said it was a coward who shot him. Your father was in Amarillo when it happened. He heard it from a man who'd heard it from a man. Stories change on the road. Silas turned his head to look at her. But I want you to hear this from me, and I want you to remember it. Your father is not a coward, and he was not wrong to grieve. What he wrote in that letter, that he was wrong about me, I don't know what changed his mind. But I'm going to try to keep him alive so you can ask him yourself. She nodded. A tear slid down through the dirt on her cheek. She did not wipe it away. After a while she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. She held it flat on her palm and showed him. A tin star. Bent at one point. The plating worn down almost to the base metal along the raised letters that still read, faintly, Deputy Marshal, Kansas. Silas stared at it. That's yours, she said. My father kept it. All these years. I don't know how he got it. I threw it in the Arkansas River, Silas said quietly, the day I quit. He must have fished it out. He must have. He took it from her. It was lighter than he remembered. Everything was lighter than he remembered. He had spent 6 years believing the world had let him go, and here in the palm of his hand was proof that the world had never let go of anyone, that men carried each other, in tin and in gilt and in unsent letters, across whole decades of silence. He closed his fingers around the star. Scars mean it lived, he said. He was not sure who he was saying it to. Himself, maybe. Or Mary, wherever she was. Or the girl. Or the man on the ridge waiting to die or be saved. A thing without scars didn't live long enough to earn any. Ellen watched him. My mother said something like that once. About what? About a horse we had that got cut up in the wire. She said the scars were how you knew it was ours. Silas smiled. It felt strange on his face, like a language he had almost forgotten. I would like to meet your mother, he said. You will. He did not correct her. He could have. He could have told her that he might not. That in an hour he was going to ride down into a place where 4 hard men were waiting. That odds were odds and no amount of wanting closed them. But there was a kind of promise a child gave you sometimes that was worth more than a truth, and he was not going to take that from her. He put the star in the pocket over his heart. The sky in the east was pale gold now. In half an hour, it would be full dawn. In half an hour, he would need to move. He stood up. His knees cracked again. He offered his hand and pulled Ellen to her feet. Listen to me, he said. You're going to stay here, behind these trees. If I don't come back by full noon, you're going to walk east, Ellen, not west. Promise me. Until you hit the wagon road, and you're going to flag the first traveler you see, and you're going to tell them your name, and that you need to be taken to the town of Bent's Ford. You'll be safe there. There's a woman named Ada Harker who runs the mercantile. Tell her Silas Ward sent you. She'll keep you until your father finds you. And if my father doesn't come, then Ada will raise you. She's raised worse. Ellen looked at him a long moment. Then she reached up and hugged him. Fast. Hard. The way a child hugs when a child does not have the words. He held her, for the count of 3, and then he let her go, because the light was coming and the ridge was waiting, and Bram Coyne, whom he had once nearly killed, and who had nearly killed him, and who had somehow, across 6 broken years, forgiven him first. Bram Coyne was still up there, still alive. He had to believe it, still alive and waiting. He mounted Kettle. Silas. He looked down. Come back, she said. I mean to. He turned the horse. And rode. The Hallbrook place sat on a shelf of pink rock above a dry wash. A cabin, and a leaning barn, and a corral half fallen down. Silas came in from the east, low along the wash. On foot. Kettle tied a quarter-mile back in a cedar brake. The sun was still below the ridge behind him. That meant his shadow did not throw. That meant, for one more quarter hour, he was a man made of dust and nothing else. He counted them from cover. 2 on the porch. 1 asleep with his hat over his face. 1 awake but slumped, rifle across his knees, watching the west road because west was where a rescuer should come from. A 3rd inside. Silas could see the movement through the broken shutter, the shape of a man pacing. And the 4th, the silent one, nowhere in sight. That was bad. That was the worst of the 4 to lose track of. He'd have to trust that the silent one was with the hostages, in the back room, guarding. Bram Coyne's wife. Bram Coyne himself, if he was still alive. Silas closed his hand on the dragoon. He said nothing to any god because he had made his peace with silence a long time ago. He simply moved. He came up along the blind side of the cabin, along the wall where there were no windows, and he waited under the porch corner while the sleeping man on the porch snored and the watching man yawned. Then, when the watching man turned his head to spit off the far side of the porch, Silas rose up out of the shadow like something the earth had been keeping and put the barrel of the dragoon against the base of his skull. Don't, he whispered. The man froze. Set the rifle down. Slow. The rifle went down onto the boards without a sound. Now the pistol. The pistol followed. Now wake your friend. Nice and gentle. Tell him not to reach. The man reached out with his boot and nudged the sleeping one. Under the hat opened his eyes and saw the dragoon and saw Silas' face and knew, in an instant, everything. He did not reach for his gun. He was a smarter man than the yard had suggested. On your bellies, Silas said. Hands behind your heads. They went down. He had rope in his pocket. 6 years on a farm, and a man always had rope in his pocket. He bound them fast, wrists to ankles, mouths stuffed with their own bandanas, and he did it in under a minute because his hands, when it mattered, still remembered. Then he went in through the front door low and fast. The pacing man turned with his gun half drawn, and Silas shot him through the shoulder. Not the heart, not this one. This one might have things to say, and the man dropped screaming, and from the back room came a shout and the sound of a chair scraping, and then, terribly, a woman's cry cut short. Silas kicked the back door in. The silent one had a knife at a woman's throat. She was tied to a chair. Her hair was gray at the temples, and there was a swelling under her eye, and she was looking at Silas with the exact same eyes as her daughter, flat, brave, without hope, without fear. Behind her, in the corner, a man lay slumped against the wall with his hands tied behind him and blood down the side of his face. Ellen Coyne. Alive. Breathing. Watching. You, Ward? The silent one said. So he was not silent after all. He had simply chosen not to speak until it mattered. Ward. Put the gun down, or she dies. Silas did not put the gun down. You put the knife down, he said, and you live. The silent one smiled. It was a bad smile, and it was the smile of a man who had already decided which way this would go, and Silas saw the decision in his eyes a full half-second before his wrist moved. Silas fired. The dragoon roared for the 4th time in 6 years, and the silent one's head snapped back, and he went down, and the woman screamed, and the knife clattered to the floor without ever having touched her throat. Silence. Then, from the corner, Ellen Coyne laughed. It was a broken, wet laugh, the laugh of a man who had spent a night sure he was dead and now was not. Ward, he croaked. You slow son of a bitch. 6 years I waited for you, and you show up at sunrise like a dam. Save your breath, Bram. Silas cut the woman loose first. She fell into his arms for 1 second, and then pushed herself upright and went straight to her husband and knelt beside him and put her forehead against his forehead and did not cry, because she was Ellen's mother and Ellen did not cry either, and now Silas understood where the girl had gotten it. He cut Bram loose. He looked at the wounds. Scalp cut, deep bruise across the ribs, nothing that would kill him, nothing that a slow ride and a patient wife couldn't mend. Ellen Coyne looked up at him. I was wrong about you, he said. In Kansas. I was wrong. I know, Silas said. Your girl told me you cried in Amarillo. Bram's eyes filled. He did not wipe at them. She's safe. She's a quarter-mile east. Waiting. Bram closed his eyes. His wife put her hand on his cheek. Silas stepped back. He let them have the moment. He walked out through the front room, past the man with the shoulder wound who was still whimpering, past the 2 bound on the porch, out into the yard where the sun had cleared the ridge now and lay on the pink rock like something poured. Cotter Reeves was standing at the edge of the yard, alone, on foot, pistol in his hand, not yet raised. Of course he'd caught up. Of course he'd found the horse in the cedar brake and come up quiet, the way Silas had come up quiet, because they were the same kind of man, or had been, or one of them still was. Ward, Reeves said. Reeves, you've cost me 4 men. You brought 7. You could still walk out of here. Silas shook his head slow. No, he said. I don't think I could. Reeves' hand moved. Silas' hand moved. The dragoon spoke one more time, and it was the last time it would ever speak, and Cotter Reeves went down in the dust at the edge of the yard, and Silas Ward stood alone in the sunrise with his hand aching around a grip he did not intend to hold again. He walked back to the cedar brake. Ellen was already running toward him before he was halfway there. He caught her under the arms and lifted her, 6 years of forgotten strength coming back all at once. And he set her on Kettle's back, and he led the horse the last stretch to the cabin himself, because his legs would not carry a rider and a walker both, and because the walking was, somehow, the part he needed. At the door of the Hallbrook place, Ellen slid down and ran inside, and Silas heard her cry, one single sharp sound, the first he had ever heard her make, and then he heard her mother's voice, and her father's. And he stood on the porch and looked out over the pink rock and the long dry country, and did not go inside, because the moment inside was not his. He put his hand in the pocket over his heart. The tin star was there. He took it out and looked at it once in the full sun. Then he pinned it, gently, to his shirt. Not for the town, not for the law, for himself. For the 6 years he had tried to bury it, and the one morning that had brought it back. Years later, when Ellen Coyne was a grown woman with children of her own, she would tell them about the quiet man on the plateau who had opened his door to a bleeding girl at dusk and ridden out at 3 in the morning to save a family he did not owe. She would tell them about the tin star her father had fished from the Arkansas River and carried for 11 years without knowing why. She would tell them that some debts were paid not in coin, but in coming when called. And when travelers passed the old cabin on the plateau, where the lavender still bloomed along the west wall, they would sometimes see an old man on the porch with a gray hat and a tin star on his shirt, watching the road east, not for trouble, not anymore, but for anyone who might yet knock.